On March 31st, 1922, 6 people vanished inside an isolated Bavarian farmhouse. 3 days later, investigators discovered that someone had been living in the house among the dead. Bavaria was still trapped in the last grip of winter. The fields around Kaifeck were bare and dark, and the forest nearby seemed to fold its branches inward like crooked fingers closing over the dirt paths. In the middle of this silent expanse stood the Hinterkaifeck farm, a massive structure, almost too large for the family who lived there. Thick walls held in the cold, the smells, the secrets. Villagers said the farm felt wrong, too isolated, too quiet, too alive. The Gruber family had lived there for decades. Andreas, the patriarch, was a hard man, shaped by war, by years of labor, by the tensions he himself created. He spoke little, watched everything, and carried a kind of authority that made people uneasy. His wife, old Cecilia, was worn down by years of silence, arguments, and things she had witnessed without ever daring to speak of them. She moved through the house like someone who had learned not to disturb anything. Their daughter Victoria had returned to the farm after her husband's death, a gentle, devout woman, but marked by a life too heavy for her shoulders. She raised her 2 children, little Cecilia, 9 years old, bright, perceptive, too aware for her age, and Joseph, 2 years old, a quiet child who seemed to understand instinctively that noise did not belong in this house. Life on the farm was harsh. Days began before dawn. Andreas fed the animals, checked the fences, chopped wood. Victoria tended to the children, washed clothes in freezing water, cooked meals. Old Cecilia swept the floors, kneaded dough, kept the stove burning. Nights were long and cold, and the wind slipped through the cracks like a breath from another world. The farm lived by the rhythm of seasons, harvests, and livestock. Nothing seemed able to disturb this routine until the days leading up to the tragedy. It started with small things, details you notice but don't want to believe. Andreas found footprints in the snow coming from the forest, heavy, deliberate footprints. They crossed the field and stopped at the back door of the farmhouse, then vanished. No return trail, no detour, just an arrival. He followed them with his eyes, then with his boots, but they ended abruptly, as if the person who made them had dissolved into the walls. He searched the house, inspected the attic, opened cupboards, nothing. But the next night he heard footsteps above his head, slow, heavy, as if someone was walking in the attic. He climbed the ladder with a lantern. The attic was empty, but the air was freezing, unnaturally cold, as if a presence had just slipped away. Old Cecilia noticed objects moving. A key disappeared. A door she was certain she had closed was found ajar. The dog growled at empty corners. The cows, usually docile, became restless. Little Cecilia said she heard someone walking at night. Victoria woke up suddenly, convinced she had heard whispering in the hallway. But every time she checked, the house was still, too silent. On March 31st, a new maid arrived, Maria Baumgartner, a simple, timid woman hoping for stability. She knew nothing of the farm's reputation, nothing of the footsteps, the missing key, the strange noises. She placed her suitcase in the small room near the kitchen, sat on the bed, and felt a strange sensation, like someone watching her from the doorway. She tried to dismiss it. She had no idea the house had already chosen her fate. The day unfolded under a heavy atmosphere. The wind blew hard. The animals were agitated. The sky hung low and metallic. Night fell earlier than usual, as if something wanted to cover the farm before its time. In the kitchen, old Cecilia prepared dinner. Victoria rocked Joseph. Little Cecilia traced shapes on the table with a piece of wood. Andreas kept glancing toward the barn, as if expecting someone. Then a dull sound echoed from the barn, a heavy thud. Andreas stood up, grabbed his lantern, and stepped outside. He did not return. Minutes passed. Too many minutes. Victoria, worried, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed him. She did not return either. Old Cecilia, sensing something was wrong, went out next. Then little Cecilia, calling for her mother. Then Joseph, left alone in his crib, crying into the emptiness. One by one, they walked into the darkness, drawn toward the barn by something they could not name, something that waited for them, something that knew they would come. What happened inside the barn remains a mystery. The bodies were found later, arranged neatly, covered with hay, as if someone had wanted to protect them, or hide them, or keep them close. Their faces showed fear, surprise, struggle, except for little Cecilia, whose hair had been torn out in clumps, as if she had fought, tried to escape, survived a few moments longer than the others. Inside the house, Maria lay in her bed, as if struck in her sleep. Joseph was found in his crib, still wrapped in blankets. The house was silent, but it was not empty. For days after the murders, someone lived in the farmhouse. The fire was kept burning, the animals were fed, bread was eaten, a lantern was moved. Footprints appeared in the snow. Smoke rose from the chimney. A neighbor passing by at night saw a faint light moving behind a window. Someone walked the halls. Someone slept in the beds. Someone breathed in the rooms where the family had died. When investigators finally arrived, they found chilling signs. A man's scarf in the attic, smelling faintly of metal. A door locked from the inside. A handprint on a beam too high for any family member to reach. Straw disturbed in the attic, as if someone had been lying there for weeks. The missing key was never found. Rumors spread. Some said a vagrant had been living in the attic long before the murders. Others believed the killer knew the family intimately, had watched them, studied them, waited for the right moment. Some whispered that the farm itself was cursed, that it drew in lost souls and kept them, that the walls absorbed fear, violence, breath of the living and the dead. The truth was never discovered. No one was ever arrested. The farm was eventually torn down, the land left empty. But those who walked near the site claimed they heard things. Soft footsteps in the snow, a child crying in the wind, the creak of a barn door opening on its own. They said the earth still remembered, that the silence there was not natural, that Hinterkaifeck had not let go of its secrets, and perhaps it never will.